4 is a landmark post-World War II novel, published in 49. It's an examination and extrapolation from the catastrophe of Stalinist Russia. In 1984, a dystopian world has emerged in which 3 major powers fight endless, pointless wars and force intellectual and personal homogeneity on their third of the world's populations. In Oceania, which would be, I guess, the New World plus the Anglosphere, so it would include the British Isles and Australia and such. This is where Winston Smith, the main character, lives, and it is a world in which totalitarian politics have been enabled by technological advances. So there's a complete surveillance society, at least among the members of the party. Now, the party is what's left, whose ideology is ingsoc, is a transformation of English socialism. It's transformed itself into an authoritarian system of supervision and surveillance and dishonesty. There is an active attempt or active choice to abolish history and to continuously transform the evidence of the past to suit the prevailing desires of the political elite. Now, the political regime is personified by a figure called Big Brother. He is the state. He is also menacing, and he is eternal in the sense that he is not just an individual, if he ever was. Even Stalin dies, but if you can imagine a deathless Stalin, that would give you a sense of who Big Brother was. Now, Winston is a member of the outer party, which is perhaps 10% of the society. The inner party is perhaps 1%, and the remaining 90% are the proles, the proletarians. And they're kept busy and they're kept distracted. And so they're politically quiescent. It's the inner party that is inscrutable and very hard to comprehend. We will eventually meet a member of the inner party named O'Brien. And Winston, from his position in the inner party, knows that the history that is told is fraudulent. His job is at the Ministry of Truth, which is to say the Ministry of Propaganda, which is to say the Ministry of Lies. And so since every few months, Oceania changes sides from siding with Eurasia to siding with East Asia, well, that means that all the prior antecedent news articles and newspapers have to be rewritten. The originals thrown away, and the fraudulent copies or the fraudulent alternatives put in their place. That way, by controlling the past, the party controls the future. And it's this control of reality that Orwell is most concerned with examining. Is it possible to have make-believe stand in for reality? And I think the answer is that it's possible to do so temporarily over a period of time. But sooner or later, I think Steven Pinker is the one who said it's the greatest understatement of the 21st century. I've been counting. He said, reality exerts a powerful selection pressure, and that's the countervailing force to the insistence on politically manufactured make-believe. So eventually, Winston Smith rebels, and he does so quietly and personally by falling in love with Julia, who is also a member of the outer party, and they are eventually caught, and they are tortured into right belief, but also right feeling. In other words, they are taught to give up on every illusion that they had of avoiding the omnipotence of the party and Big Brother. And they are also forced to accept the fact that they will sacrifice their beloved to save themselves from their deepest fears. This happened in the case of Winston Smith when his inner party torturer, O'Brien, tells him that 2 and 2 is 5. He holds up 4 fingers. He says, "How many?" Winston says 4. He doesn't know what he's supposed to say to avoid the pain, because the torture is mechanized as well. And the pain is made so extreme that he's unable to see reality. And then, at least for a minute or for a moment, he says, yes, 4, 5, 5. He sees 5. He can't be sure that 2 and 2 is 4. And that is the critical turning point. Orwell's book is a great defense of freedom of thought. And it is also a great defense of making sense during a time of hysterical inability to make sense. Politics sometimes forces people into extraordinary contortions. And Orwell has always been a great avatar of speaking the truth and speaking the truth plainly. He was an interesting individual in that he distrusted communism and feared its totalitarian tendencies, but he was a committed English socialist in the sense that he was not opposed to a large welfare state. So he was an important writer of the 20th century because of the intellectual content of his work. One of the most interesting things introduced in Orwell's 1984 is the language Newspeak, and there's an appendix at the end about what Newspeak is and what it does to the English language. Newspeak is the only dialect of English that is allowable within the party. And it cuts back on words and on verbal complexity in the hope of restricting thought and limiting the possibility of what can be thought. So language as politically weaponized in the case of Newspeak means that even the possibility of disagreement with the party is eliminated. And of course, the control of language is authoritarian and draconian. So the bare binaries of good and bad get intensified with plus good and plus bad. And that's all you can say about good and evil. Whatever the party says is good is plus good. And whatever the party says is bad is plus bad, or even double plus bad. So the idea is that language is dangerously prostituted to politics, and it enables and reinforces and legitimizes political evil. And he's certainly right about that. The truncated ability to speak is a limitation on political freedom. And the goal of the regime is not merely acquiescence. The goal of the totalitarian regime in 1984 is complete control, not just of the actions, but also of the psyche, the inner person. And the most important element in this is the control of language, but also there's the 24-hour-a-day surveillance for the members of the party, 24 hours a day surveillance for members of the party. What this means is that there's no way out once these totalitarian regimes have been created. It's not clear that there's any solution to the problem. Winston Smith and O'Brien talk about the possibility that the proletarians may revolt against this, but the totalitarians of Ingsoc are much more effective at controlling the proletarians than the prior capitalists had been, and there's no chance of them becoming politically mobilized. So instead, what we're left with is the gruesome image given to us by O'Brien. If you want to imagine the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face, because humanity is going to be stepped upon and crushed by the unstoppable force of dishonest and anti-rational politics. This is a terrifying book. It is the source of many commonplace words in the English language now, like doublethink, where you have to think one thing, but also know the opposite is true at the same time. That's when you are telling a lie, but persuading yourself that it's not really a lie, because whatever suits your political purposes is the truth. Or something like, Orwellian itself, meaning totalitarian, and totalitarian in the most dangerous sense, that it tries to control thought as much as it controls conduct. Big Brother is a kind of secular God, and this is a sort of secular theocracy. O'Brien himself is intellectual and committed to Ingsoc and to Big Brother, but he knows at the same time that it's a fraud. This double-mindedness, this doublethink, can be turned on and off. He can literally say that 2 and 2 is 4, or 5, depending on what the party requires. This is quite similar to the horrific case of Lysenko in Stalinist Russia. Lysenko was an uneducated agronomist who decided that he could revive Lamarckian genetics. What that meant is that he could make plants and animals have qualities by acting upon their predecessors. So if you cut the tail off a mouse and its children and its children and its children, eventually 10 generations into it, the mice just give up and stop having tails. Now, it turns out none of this is true. And it was completely catastrophic when it was applied to agriculture. So it caused a number of famines, which killed millions of people. It was, on the other hand, endorsed by Stalin, who was willing to kill anyone who spoke or wrote against Lysenkoist make-believe biology. And what it did was set back the Soviet economy enormously. And it was a kind of politically compulsory nonsense. This is a very dangerous problem. And what Orwell is taking up this problem in its seriousness. The demand that we say what we know is not so, that we affirm that 2 + 2 is 5, or as Lysenko claimed, wheat can be taught to grow in the snow. That is going to be wrecked upon the rock of external reality. The only way to stop that interaction with external reality is to constantly change it, constantly reinforce the make-believe, and expect that will be the static condition of human beings forever. The focus on language and how it influences human thought, the lack of privacy, the lack of individuality, the need for scapegoats like Emmanuel Goldstein, and of course the corresponding need for deified heroes like Big Brother, are all thought-provoking constructions. And Orwell's novel has been a powerful text that's asked a lot of the big questions. And the difficulties, the disasters, the looming threats that he talks about aren't looming anymore. We've encountered them, we've run aground on them, and the connection between politics and truth is still a vexing one, and it's one that we will have to pursue in our reading of this.
Thank you so much, Michael. Now, if you could actually pop your camera back on so
Hello.
Everybody can see you. Hello. I think that we still need your camera. We can hear you.
Okay, camera. Oh, let's see. Start. Is that it? No?
Nope. Well, Michael gets his camera on. Thank you to those who wrote the questions in during the lecture.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep. There should be a small video switch right at the bottom of your screen. And we can certainly continue while you're figuring this out. Please edit.
They can see me.
Nope, we can't see. Oh, maybe we can see you. Let me check. I might have your. I've lost your camera, but as long as we can see you, that would be great. So thank you everybody for those who wrote in some questions. And now we're gonna take some of those Q&A. If you have any more throughout this process, feel free to add those into the Q&A, upvote each other's questions, and we'll go from there. We did also get quite a few questions via our registration. It's another great way if you have questions you want to listen to or have the professor answer, to always put those in. So let's start with actually one of our registration questions. Do you believe, Michael, that the existence of the novel and its vivid depiction of Big Brother has actually helped stop authoritarian movements from taking hold, considering all of the protests that have been used, that have used that depiction, such as the US after the passage of the Patriot Act and so on?
Yes, I think it has. It's given us a vocabulary to deploy when talking about our concerns about the centralization of political power combined with the technology of mass surveillance. And the encroachment on individuality and on privacy doesn't even have to be malicious or totalitarian in intent. I can see lots of the current COVID crisis lending itself to surveillance of people, not with the intention of depriving them of their liberty, rather as a means by getting control, a means of getting control of a public health crisis. So, often even our well-intentioned activities have unintended bad consequences.
Okay. Now, do you see present day similarities as well in China, Egypt, and Turkey, and where regimes take advantage of the technology to control people?
Well, I mean, China is the great example. The chairman of the Chinese Communist Party is a quasi deity. He's the stand-in for what the emperor used to be. And it's an authoritarian top-down tradition, and it's managed to use the technology of the internet very, very effectively in controlling people. Their system of social credit can deny people that make waves the ability to get a job, the ability to use transportation, the ability to get an apartment. So it's a pervasive and very dangerous tendency. And I think it's best exemplified in how far the Chinese have gone in a surveillance society.
Okay. Could the nationalistic views in the book based on historic events in the late 19th and 20th century until after the Second World War be transformed into modern times where nations are replaced by tech giant companies? Would the impact be similar except the ongoing wars described in the book?
Wow, I had never thought of that. I mean, it's a very interesting question. Damn. I mean, one more thing to worry about. Here I was going into my my retirement with only a small collection of things to be concerned about. Now I have the possibility of tech giants actually becoming autonomous political players. I suppose it's possible, and not just possible, that the tech giants have taken the place that multinational firms like oil companies used to have. They're the big heavy hitters now, not the energy companies. And it seems to me that eventually they're going to have to be broken up in the same way that the old monopolies like Standard Oil and the old trusts got busted because they were dangerous to the market, but also dangerous to the political equilibrium of society. Control of information is even more powerful than control of gasoline.
Well, and one of the things that you brought up numerous times was the importance of the English language and the dangers of the restrictions. I recently was watching a news channel that had a, like, click here, take a survey. And I'm not going to tell you what the topic was, but they were like, so you can select exceptional, very good, or excellent. And it's one of those ideas that you were just saying where the limit of speech or the limit of thought can be extremely dangerous. Could you talk a little bit more about what you see from Orwell's warnings into today's world, whether it's via social media, political agendas, news coverage?
Sure. Francis Bacon said that knowledge is power. And I'd be tempted to say it's more than that, but it certainly isn't less. If you can take control of language and implement it coercively, then you are taking a large domain of political power because you are restricting what can be said and by extension, what can be thought. So the control of language is very dangerous. My sense is that institutions that control it, and here I'm thinking primarily of universities, but also of the mainstream media, the usages that they deploy, all right, often become benchmarks, all right? And well, the question is, are they particularly able to discern the true nature of reality so that they don't cost us anything when they restrict what we can and can't say? The bigger question, and this one I've been coming back to of late, is that we need a commonly agreed upon reality. Otherwise, we can't get anything accomplished. Society breaks up because communication breaks up. But here's the question lurking behind that: who among us is wise enough, or inspired enough to actually claim that they know the true nature of what's real, and that they're able to tell us, regular folks, the true nature of reality? I mean, you would have to be something like a prophet, and in one sense they're in short supply, and in another sense there are far too many of them.
Okay.
So the question is, who decides what's real? And look at the dangerous consequences of not having agreement on that.
Now, a follow-up question that came into the Q&A is a nice and short one too, and a fairly direct answer, maybe, who knows, is the new language in politics today comparable to the newspeak that Orwell talked about?
Yes.
There you go. Nice and short answer.
Yeah. And that's on both sides.
Yes.
Both sides work hard to limit what you can say and to frame the discussion using restrictions on language.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, there's no, as far as I can see, no neutral umpire to call balls and strikes here. Everybody's got an opinion. It's not clear who's got the best one, or where the right 0 point to start out is.
So moving forward a little bit, changing the topic from language, although I'm sure we'll come back to it. It's such an interesting thing in today's society and comparison. But Orwell's world is inner control of the inner person. This person is saying, I'm taking the explicit bias training programs, want to control the inner person. Would you agree?
Well, yes, they're trying to change, to modify people's thinking, with the intention there from that of modifying people's actions. There might be circumstances in which that's a good thing. There might not be. My guess is probably depends upon the circumstance. In the same way that, say, at least we can do it down here. If you get a traffic ticket, you, instead of taking the ticket, you can go to traffic school and they'll teach you how to drive again, like they did in driver's ed, but it's only 3 hours. And that actually is found to reduce people's accidents. Well, maybe it's justified with people that have tickets, all right? People that have displayed some overt or controversial bias. But in general, I don't think most people need traffic school. Although occasionally when I drive, you might think that they did.
Okay. I love all the questions coming in. Keep them coming.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah. And so many different facets in not only Orwell's time, but in today's world. It's one of the reasons I think why the book keeps coming back at various times throughout. Actually, one of the articles, I'll get to the next question here, but one of the articles I was reading while I was prepping for this was from the Jacobin magazine. And they were saying that 1984 sales have spiked for the second time in 4 years. The first time being when President Trump took office, and a lot of the spike was associated with the fake news and changed facts, all of that stuff. And then the second spike actually just came recently after we had announced, ironically, that we were going to be doing this book. mostly because there were some quotes from some of the political factors of on the other side of it, of saying that the U.S. has become basically an Orwell 1984 dystopian universe of limiting free speech, and that was in support of the president. Political agendas aside, what do you like? Is Orwell's warnings, can they be utilized and turned depending on which way you go? To basically be either against or for whatever your political agenda may be?
Well, I think that a defense of free speech, the way one of the 19th century liberals, like say John Stuart Mill did,
Yeah.
I think that comes as close as I'm familiar with to a neutral standard, which is say we let everybody say whatever they want, and then we'll modify it, to the minimum amount practical. So, there's the old hackneyed phrase that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Fair enough. What we're saying is, though, for the most part, we want to extend people's right to speak as far as possible. And what that means is distinguishing between words and things. In other words, when someone disagrees with you using words, that's different from someone disagreeing with you using a stick. Mm-hmm. Right? And civil society requires that we allow people to use words the way they want, because they're firing blanks there, or at least we have to understand that's what it is. We don't allow them to beat each other up as a way of expressing their dismay, right? That's the wrong way for civil society to work. So I'm a liberal in an archaic sense. I'm someone who thinks that, I'm not always right. I have to accept the fact that I'm not omniscient. And that means that sometimes I may be wrong, which means that it's smart for me to allow people to disagree with me because, well, I'm fallible. John Stuart Mill's powerful point is that everyone that wants to restrict freedom of speech, saying you can't say that or you can't think that, is assuming themselves to be infallible. Okay. Right? And nobody can sustain that. So you may not like what people say, but that's not the same thing as being hit by those people. And you got to learn to live with it.
Now, is freedom of thought equal to freedom of speech, as well as is politically correct language considered a control language?
Well, I believe it is a control language. I don't think the people even that advocated, the changing of language would claim it's anything else. They say, look, language is important. It modifies and translates our inner self to external action, and we're controlling it with the intention of achieving some good. Now, the problem is, in a pluralistic society with many different and necessarily many different accounts of what's good, who gets to decide what you can say? Who gets to decide what's within that Overton window of what's discussable? Okay. And that's an interesting problem, particularly because we now live in such a hyper-politicized age that even the news media, regardless of whether it's Fox or CNN or who it is, all of them are players now. They're not just neutral observers. All of them are staked out in ideological territory. I'm not sure that is a service to the listeners.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, after over 40 years of neoliberalism and the subsequent dismantling of the welfare state and privatization of many other public functions, and given the most anti-intellectual discourse today comes from the hyper-libertarianism, how can it be said that 1984 is more relevant today than ever? It seems that today's Orwellians are not Stalinists or fascists, but extreme libertarianism.
Well, I don't doubt that the extreme libertarians have an unreasonable fixation. The problem with libertarians isn't hard to describe. Anybody with any sense thinking about politics is going to agree that liberty is a good thing. In other words, all other things being equal, leaving people alone to live the way they want is a good, desirable end. The problem with libertarians is that they take a good thing and they transform it into the good thing. And that means that they've created a kind of new golden calf that everybody has to get down and worship. Now, the problem is that when they move from liberty being a good thing to being the good thing, they're just wrong. There are, in fact, lots of good things, and they compete for our attention and resources, and they're incommensurable, and you can't quantify them successfully, and we just have to learn how to find a satisfactory balance. Let me give you an example. We would have a somewhat more liberty if we allowed planes to take off and land from airports when they happen to hit the airport. In other words, when the pilot wanted to land or take off. Unfortunately, that would cause many problems for public safety on account of airplane crashes. Weighing them together, we say, well, still liberty is a good thing, but we can't let you have this liberty, gentlemen and ladies, because it is very unfortunate for the people who live near airports. Well, okay, the libertarians are wrong, but they're far from the only ones who are wrong. And for the most part, with the exception, I would say, of Fox News, particularly Fox Business News, there aren't very many of them in the mainstream media. Yeah, I would say you more usually see them or hear them actually on radio shows, right? The mainstream media is still concerned with controlling speech, and that means organizing and controlling the categories with which we understand reality. All right, but they're not libertarians. I would say they're the avatars of neoliberalism. In other words, over the past 30 years, the gains economically from the internet economy have overwhelmingly gone to the top 10% of American society. And their interests are generally represented in the mainstream media. All right, so yeah, I think that neoliberalism has been actually pretty good to the credentialed class, and that they've done pretty well. They haven't done a good job in meeting their responsibilities to the rest of society. And that's why we have so many people pissed off.
Okay.
Right.
So going to the question, they questioned if 1984 can still be considered one of the, most important books of our, current lifetime, just as a, in its facts, or not facts, but in its story and in its warnings and everything like that. So with that thought, do you still consider it one of the more important things, and do you consider it more as like a warning? Or one of the questions that also came in is the dystopian visions of the future from Orwell and Huxley have turned out to be more prophetic, and which vision is more terrifying? So is it important because it's more of a prophetic and a warning, or is there more substance in there too that we can take into?
Well, I think his concerns about the return of absolute authority, mediated by technology, I think that's a prophetic insight. On the other hand, he failed to see that technology is in some ways liberating. Look at the changes that have happened now that everybody has a camera on their cell phone. You can take photos, and these often are at variance with the official accounts. So in some ways, it has actually liberated individuals. I mean, let's be fair to technology. It hasn't all been one way. People can leak information now in a way they never could before. So it's possible that technology can be both liberating and restricting. And it's only fair to recognize that it has done a lot for people to be able to get to the kind of information that we can all get on the internet now. So, 2 cheers for technology. And the worry is, what are we supposed to do with the big companies that have all our information? And that I don't know.
Switching gears slightly, for overall just thoughts on literature in general and everything. We have a question here that I find very interesting of what do you make of the recent news of the school in Massachusetts of the disrupt text movements that is pulling classic text from the curriculum?
Well, that's cultural vandalism.
Okay.
I mean, that's all. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, like so obviously we want to keep these classic texts for so many different reasons in schools and in libraries and not have them pulled. We also have a question here of I read about prima facie, I'm going to mispronounce that, I apologize, example that puts the authoritarian threat even in our public libraries. In Lafayette, Louisiana, the trustee board just denied an open forum about voting issues a few days ago, since the board determined that there weren't enough right-wing representatives included as part of the forum. Public libraries too are obviously struggling with some of the Newspeak and authoritarianism. Is it something that you've noticed starting to creep up a little bit?
Well, for me, not so much, because I'm a professor. I love librarians and I keep a very close connection with them because they're the historian's pal. Right. What I would say is that conflicts about what libraries can contain and the information they can access, on the whole, insofar as possible, should be resolved to the maximization of information and access. In other words, there's a great line in John Locke's second treatise on government, in which he says, ultimately, the problems of society can't be left to any small number of people. What he says is ultimately the people shall judge. And that, it seems to me, local communities, in a rough general sense, should have a great deal of input into schooling and into libraries. All right. Centralized information services have their place, and there are things that are, that can be done with them that are wonderful, but also local control over things like what's the best way to spend our money. Mm-hmm. Right. That makes that does make a certain amount of sense.
So moving a little bit back into the book, the one character that you touched on but didn't really go into depth on is obviously, and unfortunately my screen has slightly frozen, so I can't pull up my notes and her name is escaping me, but Winston's love interest. We have a question here that's saying, I agree with everything your host is saying, but why do you think Orwell had Winston Smith give himself up to O'Brien by confessing his outside opinions and views, and by taking his mistress with him, putting her at risk?
Okay. I think the idea is that the individual has no chance against this kind of collective. Individuals like Winston Smith live and die. Big Brother doesn't. Mm-hmm. And that means that when the individual squares off against this, the individual is always going to lose. Now, this is for me, a radical kind of pessimism that I can't buy into. You see, one of the nice things about people being flawed is that they can't even get totalitarianism right. In other words, nothing works out, no matter what your governmental system is, nothing works out the way it's supposed to. Everything takes too long and costs too much. And if you ever try to implement anything, it doesn't matter what ideology you bring into it. I think it was Mario Cuomo that said you run for office in poetry, but you govern in prose.
Yep.
Well, okay. I don't think that we're even capable of creating a surveillance state that's completely perfect. There's always going to be a fly in the ointment.
So keeping on that theme in the sense of some of the debates that I've read, that I've had the few times I've read this book as well as performed this book, is that she was a spy, that she was sent to basically weed Winston out. And this is going more into the literary factor than the overall comparisons with today's world. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, in the sense of she's much younger than he is. She really basically just flat out tells him, she loves him right away. Yeah. And there's something of like that. I can spot people from, I can spot people that are different right away, that don't belong. And so there is this debate that I've had. I stage managed the show, and it was massive debate on her motives there. But I've also had it with other literary groups too. I wanted to get your take on that and on that character.
That's a great reading. You can't trust anyone. And although O'Brien says she betrayed you, it's not clear that O'Brien is telling the truth, and the betrayal may be in the fact that she was never in love with him to begin with, and that had always been an operative for the state. One of the problems with the totalitarian nature of the regime that Winston Smith lives under is that you never know what reality is. Nothing is as it seems. Are we at war with Eurasia, or are we at war with East Asia? Nobody seems, well, we are at different times, and it'll vary. And he's one of the ones that's changing history. One of the most powerful ideas in the book is that control of the past is crucial to controlling the present and the future. In other words, the historical narrative is an extremely important kind of linchpin for a culture. If you notice, for example, in Weimar Germany, this is 1920s Germany, the narrative of German history explaining why they had lost the First World War went from the American intervention to the sinister behavior of Jews. All right, they were sold out. And when this dishonest representation of their history became current, it sparked and catalyzed a great many radical movements. And so it is nowadays. The American history is a football, and there's a lot of bad American history going around.
Okay. We have just a little bit of time for just a couple more questions here. One of the questions that came in is very interesting. It's going back to the language factor, and it's from one of our attendees. How about when language is weaponized? And I think this is under the thought process of what speech can be controlled, what should be potentially politically correct or limited. But the question is, how about when language is weaponized? As a Black man, I consider there should be some space for political correctness, or those using the language to injure have to be stood up to.
Okay. They do have to be stood up to. Is the best way of standing up to them constricting the language or saying, don't be a jerk? I think that's, in other words, there are some verbally abusive, racist people. I don't know that there are all that many of them. I agree that language is important and it matters. And I'm certainly willing to call people out about language. But at the same time, blacklisting people on account of language, which is what cancel culture amounts to, stuff they said 18 years ago or something. I mean, it can become counterproductive and crazy fairly quickly. So here's something to think about. Maybe this would help us both find some common ground, because I agree with you in a way. When you say language is being weaponized, okay, what that is a metaphor, all right? And what you're doing is crossing the line from the word to the stick, all right? There are lots of nasty things people can say to each other. I think we've all heard them, and some of and said them as well. I mean, who knows? Mm-hmm. But the point is, the distinction between things and words is important to hold on to, all right? And giving the maximum amount of license, if you will, I mean, I think that's a fair estimation, because people will go too far, license to speech, and cutting back on taking a swing at somebody. That's where I would draw the line. So I think that disagreement, both in terms of the content of thought and in terms of the way thoughts are expressed, that's going to be intrinsic to a free society. Where people go across the line, well, I think we set that as individuals, and then we come to some consensus about that. What worries me is that we're given to words, at least some words, magic powers that they don't really have. Think about, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. If someone said the F word, it would be the beginning of the end. I mean, this was a big deal. Now, nobody cares. Why? We pulled the fangs from the blasted thing. And now it's just a thing you say when you hit your hammer with a thumb, or you hit your thumb with a hammer. So, in a way, what Lenny Bruce liked, the idea of taking the sting out of words, means that the words don't control us anymore. I think that we can find some middle ground and work it out if we're humane and benevolent people.
Wonderful. All right, there are still so many wonderful questions, but I'm very conscious of time, so I'm just going to ask this final one of the professor. Thank you so much for adding all of your questions in. The final question will be, do you think that all themes in 1984 exist in all societies, even democratic ones, and the difference is only in the number of people supporting these themes?
Boy.
Yeah. That was one of our top voted questions, which is why I had to throw it at you.
Yeah, all right. Go ahead. Make my life difficult. That's a very good question. I think that there's an overlap between the forces that are let loose in our kind of democratic regime or our kind of Republican regime, the US, that are also seen in totalitarian regimes, right? There's a tendency to enforce certain kinds of norms and certain kinds of mores. I'm inclined to think that every society does that. What distinguishes a relatively free regime from a totalitarian regime is that we do our best to make our mistakes on the side of freedom. All right. We know we're going to make mistakes, but we'll make our mistakes allowing for freedom and then cutting back in a narrowly tailored way in order to preserve as much freedom as we can without making a complete mess of things. That we have made a complete mess of things, okay, I'm willing to accept that. I've seen what politics has been like of late, but I still like that old-fashioned idea of liberalism and freedom. That's why I like Orwell's book.
Wonderful. And finally, what is the next what is the next 1984 in your opinion? Is there a book in the horizon that you think will have?
Oh boy, that's tough. Next 1984. Well, earlier, of course, there's Zamyatin's We, and there's also earlier than that Brave New World, which is in some ways almost as prescient. I can't think of a book. Maybe a Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury.
Okay, that's a great book too.
It is a great book.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. I appreciate the time.
It's a pleasure as always.
And we love having you on, and we're looking forward to the upcoming webinars. Speaking of the upcoming webinars, we do have the next Classics Revisited coming up on March 9th. We actually have at least 5 more planned, including this one on the 9th that will be airing between now and June, so the first half of the year. On March 9th is The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe, and it's a great take on what touches on the powers of the human process and human passions, excuse me. Also, we do have quite a few other webinars for libraries coming up. They are being finalized. We are super excited about what we're looking at for the next several months. If you want to be sure you are receiving invitations to all of our upcoming webinars and events, make sure to subscribe at the bottom of our website homepage to make sure you get all of the emails that you want to get. And you can also keep an eye on Classics Revisited, as well as any other upcoming events at biblioteca.com/events. There's also a reminder, we know we've had a lot of questions from libraries. If they can share these webinars with the professor to their patrons, So we've made it all available up on YouTube that you can certainly share the links. Those links are all on our website as well. Feel free to grab them and share them if questions do arise. And finally, as we wrap up the hour, thanks again for taking that work break with us. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. We do have a survey that will pop up as you exit. We love feedback. We love to know what your thoughts were and any possible suggestions on books you'd like to hear coming up. We are hoping to continue this throughout the course of the year as just work breaks every few weeks for our lovely libraries. So thanks again. Thanks to Professor Sugrue, and we appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thank you, Christy.